growing number of Republicans who say, look, we would trade off higher tax rates on people like you in order to get some spending cuts.
Well, I think that the gap between spending and revenues is so wide that there's going to have to be probably inevitably some tax increases, and people are coming to terms with that. I think the key
including
here,
you?
I think including myself, including everybody, because I think that even if you go up the fiscal cliff, you still need another $300 billion a year of cost reduction or tax increases to close the gap. If you raise taxes on the top 2% and let the Bush tax cuts expire, that's $50 billion a year. You have a deficit of $1.1 trillion. You probably can run about $900 billion a year and not have debt grow as a percent of GDP. So I think on that front, what you have to do is make sure that you link any tax increases to real entitlement reform and cost reduction. And I'm afraid what's going to happen between here and the end of the year is that they're going to give up tax increases, at least let the Bush tax cuts expire or something akin to that, and not really get any entitlement reform.
Why are you worried that that's going to happen?
Well, I think it's a strategy for getting two bites at the tax-the-rich apple. So you get one this year, and it's a little more than a down payment for the real negotiation that comes next year. So one of the things I've been recommending is that any tax increases that are agreed to are linked to a comprehensive entitlement reform, and that you, instead of agreeing to the tax increases this year, you agree to them retroactively once an agreement is reached.
So go over the cliff.
I don't know that we should go over the cliff. What I'm saying is that I wouldn't give up tax increases on the wealthy until there's comprehensive cost reduction that truly balances the budget. And then I would agree retroactively to increase the taxes once that agreement is reached.
Ed, what would you want in exchange, specifically? What do you want in exchange for paying more taxes?
Well, it's funny. If we really add up the numbers, I think you need extraordinary cost reduction or tax increases to make this work. We have a 1.1
trillion.
Well,
we know the tax rate increase first. So what do you want in entitlement cuts? What do you think needs to be cut?
Well, I think almost everything needs to be cut. You need $900 billion. You only raise $1.1 trillion in taxes. So you need 80% across the board increase in taxes.
So you're talking Social Security, Medicare?
I think everything would have to be cut in order to bring it into balance. Otherwise, you need enormous tax increases, or you're going to need a consumption tax. I think the American people haven't really woken up to what it takes to truly balance this budget. $1.1 trillion deficit is enormous. It's unprecedented. People don't really understand the magnitude of it.
Ed, well, at the same time you say you are accepting that very likely we're going to see tax rate increases. You do still argue for the fact that lower tax rates is the best way for the economy, the best way for growth. And you've taken issue with what Warren Buffett has written and talked about recently, where he says, look, number one, tax rate increases have to happen on the wealthy, and number two, he doesn't believe that raising taxes is really going to jeopardize economic growth. He doesn't think that people really invest, for instance, based on higher taxes or lower taxes. You write in your Bloomberg View column, which I want to bring up, a quote from it. You say, quote, the debate over whether to tax, redistribute, and consume income that would otherwise be invested is critical to the future of America. The country deserves better from a leader such as Warren Buffett. Exactly what do you mean?
Well, he uses four arguments in his op-ed, and I take issue with all four of those. I don't think any serious economist would accept any of his arguments.
Okay,
Let's take his first one. He says, look, if we have an investment that's better than the hurdle rate, you would invest in it regardless of the tax rate. Well, of course you would. It's a tautology. And so, really, when you think about it, if you tax income that would otherwise be invested, you're going to have less investment. And if you rank ordered investment and started investing at the best one down to the worst one, it's the marginal one that's going to be eliminated. He describes one that's better than that and says, well, you would invest in one that's better than the marginal one. Of course you would.
If you knew the outcome of it.
That's
but
right.
You don't, and that's what you're saying.
But I think all that happens is that the hurdle rate gets raised when the investable funds goes down, and people take a harsher eye,
right.
And he describes an investment that's better than that.
And we don't have time to go through all four of those points.
Yeah.
Let's say, but overall, though, what's the biggest, what gets your goat when it comes to what Buffett's saying? What's the biggest thing?
I always find frustrating is that the 1950s, for example, they say that proves that high tax rates don't affect the economy, but there were a lot of things going on in the 1950s that accelerated growth, not to mention the fact that government spending was much lower than it is today.
In the 1950s?
In the 1950s. If you look at the 1990s, okay, one way to factor out the internet, which caused the economy to grow, independent of the tax rate, is to compare the U.S. relative to Europe or Japan. We grew way faster than Europe and Japan. What accounts for that difference?
But there was a lot of government spending that happened before that, though, to get the economy onto that track, though, in the 1950s, right?
In the 1950s. Really what happened, though, is we integrated all the markets with television and roads. That created enormous economies of scale. You had huge companies that chased after those economies of scale. You sent everybody to college. That opened up new opportunities. You had 2 decades of underinvestment. That opened up new opportunities. Cost of food dropped from 20% of GDP down to less than 10% of GDP. That freed up resources for very high growth rate. Those are all things that work independent of taxes. And that's not to say that taxes don't affect it. They do affect it as well.